She did not know that the man she pulled from the mud on the worst night of her life would one day own her heart, her future, and nearly her soul. She was just a girl with calloused hands and a kind heart, living in a village where poverty was not a condition but a way of life. He was something ancient, something powerful, something that did not belong in her world at all. And yet their paths crossed in the middle of a violent storm, under a sky that seemed to be warning her to turn back. She did not listen. She never did. And what followed was the kind of love story that does not end the way you expect, one filled with beauty and darkness, with tenderness and betrayal, with a sacrifice so complete it could silence an entire room. Clara was the third daughter of a rice farmer in a quiet valley village called Milford. The kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business and your mother's mistakes before you were old enough to make your own. Clara's family was not just poor. They were the kind of poor that made neighbors speak in low voices and children avoid playing too close to their fence. Her father had died when she was 12, leaving behind a debt that her mother was still paying off when Clara turned 20. But poverty had not made Clara bitter. It had made her careful, observant, and unusually generous with the little she had. The night everything changed was the last night of the harvest season. A storm rolled into Milford so fast that the sky went from orange to black in under an hour. Clara had been walking back from delivering soup to an elderly neighbor when she heard a sound near the old broken bridge at the edge of the forest. It was not the sound of wind or animals. It was the sound of a man in pain. She found him face down in the mud beside the riverbank, dressed in clothing she had never seen before, dark and strange and somehow dry despite the rain pouring over him. His name, she would later learn, was Edmund. She dragged him to her home with the kind of strength that only desperation produces. She cleaned his wounds, which were deep but healed faster than any wound she had ever seen. She fed him warm broth and covered him with the only good blanket in the house. Her mother stood in the doorway and said nothing, which was her way of saying everything. Edmund woke the next morning looking at Clara as though she were the first light he had seen after a very long darkness. He did not explain himself. He only said thank you in a voice that felt like it came from somewhere deeper than his chest. He stayed for 3 days. 3 days of quiet conversation, of shared meals, of Clara showing him the village and Edmund watching everything with wide, curious eyes as though he had never seen an open market or a child chasing a chicken before. Clara did not ask where he came from. She had been taught by life to accept the things that arrived at her door without demanding too many explanations. On the third night, Edmund sat across from her at the small wooden table and said, very calmly, that he would like to marry her. Clara laughed. Then she realized he was not laughing. Then she said yes before she fully understood what she was agreeing to. The village did not take the news well. Milford had its own understanding of how things should work, and a poor girl with no land or status marrying a stranger with no known family or background was not part of that understanding. The woman who had once been polite to Clara now passed her on the road without speaking. Her childhood friend, a girl named Dora, told anyone who would listen that Clara had obviously done something shameful to trap the man. 2 of her cousins stopped visiting entirely. Even the village elder raised his eyebrows so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline when he heard. Clara felt each of these small cruelties the way you feel rain through a thin coat. She felt them, but she kept walking. The wedding was small and quiet, witnessed only by Clara's mother and 2 neighbors who were too curious to stay away. Edmund wore clothing that looked expensive without being loud, and Clara wore her late grandmother's dress, which was ivory and a little too long. When they exchanged their vows, Clara felt something shift in the air around them, a warmth that had nothing to do with the candles. It was only later, much later, that she would understand that the shift had not been romantic. It had been something closer to a seal. Edmund led her through the forest on foot the day after the wedding, past the broken bridge and deeper into the trees than Clara had ever gone. She expected to find a house. What she found instead stopped the breath in her chest for a full 10 seconds. There was a gate, tall and carved from something that looked like black stone but felt warm under her hand. Beyond the gate was a world that should not have existed inside a forest in Milford. There were buildings of pale stone rising against a violet sky. There were rivers that moved upward in gentle spirals. There were flowers with colors she did not have names for. Edmund stood beside her and said, quietly, "Welcome home." He explained it all slowly and carefully, the way you explain something to someone you love and do not want to frighten. He was a prince of the spirit realm, a hidden world that existed alongside the human one, separated by barriers that most people could not see or cross. He had wandered too far into the human world during a storm and been attacked by a creature that owed his family a very old debt. Clara had saved his life. In the laws of his world, saving the life of a spirit of his rank created a bond that could only be completed through marriage. He had not lied to her, he said. He had simply not told her everything yet. Clara sat with this information for a long time without speaking. Life in the spirit realm was unlike anything Clara had ever imagined. The home she and Edmund shared was a palace of warm rooms and high ceilings, filled with light that came from no visible source. Servants moved quietly through the halls, not the bowing, fearful kind but the kind who seemed genuinely content. Edmund was patient and attentive, explaining the customs of his world with care, teaching her the language of the realm in the evenings with a gentleness that made Clara forget, sometimes, that she was still afraid. She began to love the violet sky. She began to love him. This was perhaps the most dangerous thing she did. But the spirit realm had its own version of Milford's cruelty. Edmund had a former companion, a spirit woman named Vera, who had expected to be chosen as his bride and had not been. Vera was beautiful in the way that cold fire is beautiful, striking and dangerous and designed to consume. She visited the palace often, always polite, always composed, always watching Clara with eyes that measured and dismissed at the same time. Clara recognized the look. She had seen it before on Dora's face back in the village. Some kinds of jealousy were the same expression regardless of the world they come from. Vera began her campaign quietly. Small comments at formal gatherings about Clara's human origins, her unfamiliarity with spirit customs, her inability to perform the ceremonial rituals that even children in the realm had mastered. She never said anything directly cruel. She did not need to. The court around her did the work, whispering and withdrawing, leaving Clara to stand at gatherings feeling exactly as she had felt in Milford, like someone who did not fully belong in the room she was standing in. Edmund noticed but underestimated it, the way people who have always belonged somewhere tend to underestimate the weight of not belonging. Then came the night of the binding ceremony, the annual ritual where the royal household renewed its spiritual anchors to the realm. It was during this ceremony that Clara discovered the secret Edmund had not yet told her. The marriage bond between a human and a spirit prince was not simply a union. It was a transfer. Over time, the human partner's spiritual energy would be slowly absorbed by the realm itself, sustaining the spirit prince's power and keeping the hidden war stable. It was not intended to harm the human. Most humans, the elder spirits explained with careful, diplomatic expressions, did not survive long enough in the realm to feel the full effect. Clara understood, standing in that ceremonial hall with candles burning in colors she still had no names for, that she had been saved from poverty and loneliness only to be slowly consumed by something she had never agreed to. The betrayal was not that Edmund had lied. He hadn't, technically. The betrayal was that he had allowed her to fall in love with a life whose full terms she had never been shown. She looked at him across the hall and he looked back at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was guilt. It was the face of someone who had hoped, desperately, that he would find a way to fix the unfixable before she ever had to know. What happened next was not in any spirit lore or human fairy tale. Clara did not run. She did not scream or dissolve into grief. She asked for 3 days, the same number of days Edmund had spent in her world, and she spent them learning everything she could about the binding and its rules. What she found, buried in the oldest records of the realm, was a clause that even Vera had not known about. A human who willingly offered their bond, not had it taken but offered it freely and completely, would not be consumed. They would be transformed. The distinction was everything. On the third day, Clara stood before the spirit court and made her declaration. She offered her bond not as a price to be collected but as a gift freely given to the realm and to Edmund, with full knowledge of what it meant and full refusal to be a passive participant in her own story. The air in the court changed the moment she finished speaking. The elder spirits exchanged looks that Clara could not read. Then the eldest among them, a woman who looked made of moonlight and old wood, said that she had not seen a human make a willing declaration in over 400 years. The transformation was not dramatic. There was no explosion of light or sudden change in appearance. It happened over several weeks, a gradual deepening of Clara's senses, a growing ability to see the realm as it truly was rather than as her human eyes had filtered it. She did not lose herself. She expanded. She became something the spirit realm had not encountered in centuries, a human spirit, fully present in both worlds, belonging completely to neither and therefore belonging to both. Vera, watching this from the edge of every room, had no language for what she was seeing, and so she simply, eventually, stopped coming. Edmund was not the same man after that. He was quieter, more deliberate, more careful with his words in a way that Clara had not seen before. He told her once, in the evening, while they sat beside one of the upward flowing rivers, that he had spent centuries waiting to be worth the kind of love she had given him so freely and so knowingly. Clara told him that love was not a reward system. That she had not loved him because he deserved it or because she was obligated to. She had loved him because she chose to, with open eyes and a full understanding of the cost. That, she told him, was the only kind of love worth offering. Back in Milford, the villagers who had mocked Clara's marriage began to notice small things over the years. The rice harvest was always better in the valley than in surrounding areas. Storms seemed to break apart before fully reaching the village. Sick animals recovered faster. Children who wandered toward the old forest always seemed to find their way back safely, as though something gentle was watching the edge of the trees. Nobody spoke about it directly. But Dora, now older and quieter than she had been in her jealous youth, sometimes stood at her window in the evening and looked toward the forest with an expression that was not quite understanding but was no longer dismissal either. Clara never fully left the spirit realm, and she never fully left Milford. She existed in the space between, which is perhaps where the most interesting people always live. She had started as a girl with calloused hands and a generous heart, and she had remained exactly that, only now her reach was wider and her understanding deeper. The sacrifice she had made was real and it had cost her something irretrievable. But she had made it knowingly, on her own terms, in the full presence of her own will. And that, more than the palace or the violet sky or even the love of a spirit prince, was the thing that had truly changed her life.